we travel in June, we're not basically our ideas. We do want to install it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's some start small, some school solar table, so
Mhm.
that maybe public schools maybe collaborate with some larger provider, et cetera, right? And use our funds to start it. That's a longer term thing. And of course, at the same time, raising awareness, getting these interviews out to people, making presentations, maybe teaching people going out to school, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, for now, we just want to look at the landscape of the market.
Okay.
So with that, uh, comes the first question. So
Yeah, you ain't got go.
currently, solar market is very saturated with different solar technologies, right? And they're constantly being developed, especially 5-10 years. It's advanced at an alarming rate. So which ones do you think have been the most effective or used in the DC area, and why?
So when you say saturated in terms of this conversation, are we generally talking about simply the DC area and the effects of the different products in that market?
Yeah, for this
Okay.
climate, yeah.
So that's going to be a predominantly residential market. You just don't have the commercial area that you can develop like you would in other, actual states. Fingers crossed for DC statehood. And I think that when you look at the residential market, you're going to see use of things like microinverters versus string inverters being very popular. We work with Enphase products more often than not, a little bit more expensive, but we find the redundancy to be, from an installer standpoint who also manages and maintains other projects, very advantageous. If you want to look at a financial standpoint, I don't see any energy stock touching what Enphase's stock price has done in the past, year or so. They're obviously doing things right from a business standpoint, and I can say on the product side, we're really liking what we're seeing in terms of their support and in terms of their product development. They have something called an IQ8. It's a new inverter coming out. And this is, at least what we've heard, is going to be a grid independent inverter. So essentially you would have a panel, you would have a microinverter on the back, and you would be able to, power a small, device with it. So the idea is, let's cut the large electrical needs out, and where, yeah, that's cool in our markets in the sense that, people could have power when the grid goes out, because, most people don't understand the grid goes out, solar doesn't really operate either. We're still on the actual grid network of the city. But when you lose power, it'd be nice to have power continuously. But when you're talking about, third world areas where there is no grid to begin with, I mean, this is monumental in terms of what it's going to do for areas to skip the whole infrastructure phase of developing this costly grid that can go in and out, that, has the political headwinds, you deal with, a lot of corporate entities coming in and having to get their fair share off of, all the people that live there when it comes to, utility development. This is the step of putting utilities in the hands of the people.
How would the cost compare? Because, I mean, from other people we talked to, in many states, we found that when you sell to the grid, you sell at 10 times cheaper than you buy. And that could be a reason why people might want to go autonomous, independent from the grid. So how would that technology help?
I'm not sure on that 10-cent metric. I can tell you just in our experience, you're seeing on average maybe 11.1 to 11.3 cents per kilowatt.
Oh no, I was talking times, not cents. Like the I guess you sell 10 times lower at a 10 times lower price than you buy from the grid.
Oh, well, I
That's
was
like
sort of breaking down that metric. So
Yeah.
if you're buying power from Pepco on average 1 to 11.3 cents per kilowatt hour, you're usually seeing a rate somewhere around 5 to 6 cents being deemed a fair market rate coming back. So it's about a 50% discount, and where a lot of that comes from is there's the cost of energy, and then there's the cost of moving the energy. So, one of the reasons solar is great is because you're generating the energy on the roof and you're not running all that power through Pepco's grid. They would charge you a fee for using their energy highways. So, there's two aspects that people don't always understand, and that's you have the cost of the energy itself and then the cost of getting it to you.
Mhm.
Right. So, do you think, like, as a resident in the DMV, this kind of has to do with regulations. Do you think that the local state governments give residents much incentive to get into solar, or do you think there are any things that they do in terms of regulations that kind of deter residents from getting into solar?
And if they don't, what incentive should they give?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point you just mentioned there. As far as DC's solar market, it is one of, if not the most valuable solar markets in the United States, hands down.
That's good.
The value of the solar renewable energy certificates that are generated by the systems is vastly beyond any other state. One of the reasons is you have a very, very small area with a very, very high price tag for real estate. So there's really nowhere to develop, energy resources to produce the kind of green energy and produce the SRECs that would be needed by Pepco to, meet their mandates. As a result of that, DC is phenomenal for solar. You're looking at most clients who purchase their systems, going cash positive, because the SRECs income is, outweighs or outpaces their, their actual loan payments. So it's incredibly valuable in the district. Yes. What DC has not done well in terms of regulation is when we went to an open market for energy, is we had all these third-party companies come in. We call them third-party billers. And some of them are truly out there trying to, give people a better rate on their power, truly trying to deliver, green energy from, solar or wind or hydroelectric. But you have this like very disgustingly large handful of rotten companies out there that have, developed these predatory structures that particularly target seniors that don't understand sort of the fine print that's being thrown at them. They're given a teaser rate that skyrockets 3x, 4x, 5x, a couple months down the road once they forget about their bill. And we come across it all the time. They did a study in Maryland where over $250 million in a 2-year period was wasted going to these third-party billers. So that has put such a terrible taste in people's mouths about solar. And it's our solar sells itself in DC in the sense that the cash flow makes sense. It becomes an education game of how can we get through people's misconceptions about, are we different from these third-party billing services? What is the process of getting someone green energy? And is it a negative? Is it a minefield? And most people have had a minefield experience or heard about one from a friend or family member. And that's a constant challenge in what we do day in and day out.
So, well, actually, funnily enough, yesterday we heard a very similar thing about from a local company in Las Vegas.
Yeah, he was based
And what's going on there was that there's so many it's such an unregulated market with so many chaotic companies that they can't enforce it. And then another issue of that was that all the warranties were basically fake. I mean, they had such fine prints that that you basically don't get a warranty. That 25-year warranty is an illusion. Is that a similar case? And if so, how could you regulate based on these terms? How could we ensure that it stays, fair in DC?
So you have a couple channels of recourse. You have the DA's office that you can go through. You can go through Better Business Bureau. You can go through some of the local facilities that do have a chance of remedying situations, but they're often so overloaded with requests that it's just an unrealistic time frame for some people to get served. That aside, look, the solar business has caught a very bad name, both for people who have worked in it, seeing companies that have gone bankrupt due to mismanagement because it's been deemed this sort of gold rush of, construction. I mean, this really is a construction business, and you have all these people just seeing dollar signs and not having a project management background, and finding themselves in a very deep hole once a few competitors come in and the projected margins drop a little bit. And that's when you really start seeing the true colors of a company out there is once you see a developed market where there's maybe 3, 4, 5 major players, and they all sort of understand the environment, and they aren't having these price wars because they know they do a quality install, and they stand by their install. They know that when someone calls them on a Sunday evening saying my roof is leaking, someone's going to be out Monday morning. So it's incredibly important for someone to understand a new company versus a seasoned company, and understand what that company's model and goals are. Are they just going to be acquired by another company and then have the warranties sold off to someone else, or are they a family business? Have they, are they planning on doing this for the long haul? 25 years is a really long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, given all these problems, and given our goal, to eventually pitch this sort of idea to households, especially in underserved communities, and uh, and given the distrust of solar, I mean, we just might come across as scammers, And so, what would, if you could change? I mean, anything about the solar market in DC now, what do you think you would change in terms of, I don't know, either technology or governmental support of some kind, or legislation, or just simple awareness or popularization? How would you ensure that people know the authentic solar market, not this, and could tell, an authentic supplier from someone like that?
That's a great question. I think that DC, the solution for DC wouldn't be the solution for everywhere. DC is so small that you can have sort of a custom tailored solution that would not work in a place like, say, Atlanta, or New York, or anywhere, the size of an actual state. DC, because the solar market is so small, I think there should be some sort of ongoing interaction with the other companies, some sort of allegiance where there is some company to company vetting. Maybe there is some positive lobbying happening from the solar installers that can help bridge the gap between the utility companies, where their lawyers are writing a lot of the language that goes into these laws, and the consumers, and understanding where some of the laws that they create aren't necessarily the best for consumers, and in turn aren't the best for the utility companies. I mean, right now we can only go up to 140% of someone's historical usage, as limited by PEPCO. If we were able to max out every roof we install on, we're looking at the efficiency of every system going up drastically. We've already done all the groundwork. All we're doing is adding a couple additional strings of panels. So, the utility company gets the SRECs that they want. The extra energy is generated from green, sources in DC, which is what DC wants. And we're able to serve customers better, and that they're going to be better prepared for their power needs, further and further on down the road. So I think that's one area where I see current policies maybe being a slight hindrance, at least from our perspective. And then maybe if there was some sort of building code where, homes were required to be built solar ready. If we had, conduit pre-run from the roof down to the electrical panels with a breaker designated for that run, we're talking a very small amount of money invested if they do it at the time of construction. We've seen other states adopt this approach, and even if someone chooses not to install solar, just the fact that you're able to plug and play with a system on the roof is a huge advantage. When you're thinking about adding a system to an existing structure, it just absolutely makes sense to have that worked into plan sets.
Mhm. And
This
so
is
would you say
very-
that lobbying can be achieved by a coalition of companies? Is that what's necessary?
I'm definitely the wrong person to ask
Okay.
about what the outlook of that environment would be in terms of how it could come about. I do know that recently I feel like a lot of solar companies have felt through the pandemic the strain of trying to weather this storm, and so we've all gotten a bit tighter and realizing we can work together to accomplish this. There really aren't any companies big enough in DC to throw their weight around per se, not like a Tesla Solar City can do, not like a Vivint can do when it comes to local policy. It would be nice to, along with DC getting a voice, let's get ourselves a voice here in DC as well.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I think I'm going to ask one last question before I have to wrap it up.
Mhm.
So, once we finish our research, we're thinking of doing a program to kind of raise awareness and educate people about solar. Really quickly, what do you think are some of the essential things that we should be educating people about?
And how should we do it as well?
Yeah.
To what ways?
That's interesting. I personally find the overall understanding of the effects of solar panels in a context that people can, relate to is one of the largest challenges of renewable resources. So when someone puts a system on their roof, what does that mean in terms of number of trees saved? What does that mean economically in terms of what does this do to the much larger economic cycle? I think that making some interesting assumptions and pathways from if this area of the market is disrupted, here's what could come out of it. It would allow you guys some real creativity and kind of throwing out some interesting concepts that people could latch onto. At the same time, I just don't think people understand the effects. They don't understand, the state of the environment as it is, and they don't understand how poorly it's being managed. Especially in the past 4 years, we've seen some pretty serious rollbacks when it comes to environmental protections. So I think that maybe if it was, put in the context of, what would it take to make up for the accidents of the past 4 years, man, I would love to know that fact.
I see.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, thank you very much. And
Yeah, you answered our questions perfectly. This has been great so far. I mean, yeah.
Awesome. Well, obviously, guys, I'm happy to do a follow up. I know this is a bit rushed. I'm actually coated in bird shit from a install gone awry.
You couldn't have filled it up better. This has been amazing.
yes, wow.
I just
love to
wanted
do
to give you
follow-up.
guys
That'd be
some
awesome.
real
Well-
serious answers. I know a lot of it probably isn't the most PC, but it's how I see it, and
No, it's great.
I'm happy to share.
And yeah, and look, we'd be really happy to follow up, collaborate, and especially on projects. And we know your company is really, it is really, I guess, knowledgeable in this area
Yeah,
too, and very
qualified.
experienced. And
Look, if you guys got something cool cooking and there's a way that we can align ourselves with what we're doing to make it cooler, I'm all about it. Like I just rolled out, we're working on a program for DC jail. It's going to be a vocational program to teach these guys once they get out how to sell.
That's so cool. That's actually so cool. That's
Wow.
amazing. That's
I
awesome.
mean, like sales skills you can use everywhere. Like if you're in a solar installer, you're installing solar. But man, this might not be their last job. So let's give them something they can take to the next job. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we're really into. We just I just touched base with the Honnold Foundation. I don't know if you guys caught that movie Free Solo.
yeah,
Yeah, Alex Honnold started a foundation where he is bringing solar projects to really, really interesting areas of the world, really interesting projects. They just did a solar powered boat fleet in the Amazon. So,
Wow.
they're training the techs there and everything. It's really, really well put together. So that could be an interesting sort of avenue to go down if you want to see some of the philanthropic, sort of ventures that are a little off the wall. That
But
they're on that.
don't you also have Irvin Young, who went to Uganda, I think, for a project?
Yep.
So yeah.
Irvin he went with his church to go do some development work there. We're actually about to do a couple of projects with the diplomat of Gabon.
Hmm.
We were looking at doing solar on the embassy too. We have a couple other larger projects in the works also in the DC area, but we're trying to focus a little bit more on the nonprofit realm and just sort of DC community in specific, and using
Oh.
solar as a tool to bridge some of the gaps that seem to be happening in DC in terms of economics.
But look, I mean, if you can squeeze, some residential in, maybe we want to plant. I mean, yesterday we were told education is the first step.
Mhm.
So schools, local churches, stuff like that, and
Yeah.
it could start small. I mean,
Mhm. Definitely. I mean, you guys
well,
want to get up on a roof and swing a hammer, let me know. We'll get you up there.
oh, for sure, yeah. And
That would
I
be
mean,
cool.
actually installing it ourselves would be a whole experience.
That would
'Cause
be pretty
if
cool.
we can share it with people,
Yeah.
they understand, hands on.
Mhm.
Yeah, tell you what, anyone you talk to in DC and you get them to give me a shout about some solar, I'll make sure I'm on the roof with you, and we'll go install some panels.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you so
much.
much. This has been great.
Cool.
Thank
Awesome,
you.
guys. Take care.
All right, see you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.